Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the sandals of ancient Rome, right after a hot soak in the local bathhouse. Steam rolls off the stone walls, thick with the scent of sweat, olive oil, and whatever passed for soap back then. A toga brushes past your arm, still damp from a rinse. The floor is slick, the chatter is loud, and right beside you, someone exhales. And wow, that breath could knock over a marble column. You blink, because tonight's journey isn't about swords or senators. It's about mouths, smelly ones, and how ancient Romans, in all their imperial wisdom, decided to clean their teeth with something very specific. Spoiler alert, it's not mint. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I won't make you swish pee to prove it. And hey, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the misty heat of a Roman thermae, or public bath. It's the 2nd century CE, and this is peak relaxation. For those who aren't paranoid about athlete's foot or gladiator gossip, the bathhouse is more than a place to scrub. It's where business deals are made, secrets are whispered, and frankly, a lot of bodily fluids are shared. The scent is layered: eucalyptus from imported oils, sulfur from the heating system. But one thing cuts through it all: bad breath. And not just your average garlic-scented sigh. We're talking fermented fish sauces, wine from breakfast, and a diet that loved pickled everything. Mouths, left to their own devices, became tiny amphitheaters of decay. And here's the kicker: ancient Romans did care about hygiene. In fact, they were borderline obsessed. They had aqueducts, public latrines, rules about how to wash after doing your business. But somehow, in all this sparkling civic pride, mouths were an ongoing problem. People chewed on fennel seeds, sucked on mint leaves, or rinsed with vinegar. But halitosis was still a common complaint. One poet even described his enemy's breath as a horde of sulfur demons charging uphill. Enter the Roman bath attendant. You see him across the room. He's scraping dead skin off a rich man's arm with a strigil. He doesn't flinch at the smells anymore, but even he winces when someone starts talking too close. Teeth cleaning wasn't standardized. Most Romans didn't own a toothbrush. Instead, they relied on household hacks, herbal tinctures, or, if they had money, a dedicated slave who might help them clean their teeth each morning. You heard that right. Brushing someone else's mouth was, tragically, an actual job. And while we're still in this steamy space, you notice something else. Nobody's really smiling. Romans didn't do the whole say cheese thing. Teeth were tools for chewing, not for flaunting. And many people lost theirs early, especially if they indulged in sweet wines or honey-glazed fruits, the ancient equivalent of sipping soda all day. But here's the strange twist. Despite their breath, Roman teeth were, at least for a while, surprisingly solid. Archaeologists have examined hundreds of skulls and found many had decent dental alignment and minimal decay. That is, until Rome got richer and tastier. Because when your empire spans continents, the sugar starts to flow: exotic fruits, sticky cakes, wine thick with syrup. Suddenly, people are getting cavities, and they'll try almost anything to stop it, including, well, you'll see. But right now, you're still in the bathhouse. A senator's towel slips. Someone's arguing over philosophy. A young boy runs past you carrying a jar labeled in dark ink: Lotium. That's not water, it's urine, not spilled by accident, not hidden out of shame, but harvested, collected, and, yes, sold. We'll get to why in a bit. But for now, all you need to know is this. The Romans weren't squeamish. They saw usefulness where others saw you. And in their minds, bad breath required strong medicine. Something sharp. Something cleansing. Something that could only come from the human body itself. So tomorrow morning, when the merchant across the alley starts his daily rinse, don't be too surprised at the yellowish jug he's holding. And if you're lucky, maybe he'll offer to share. The next morning, the streets of Rome wake slowly, stone underfoot still holding the warmth of yesterday's sun. You shuffle along a narrow alley, past shuttered taverns and sleepy-eyed vendors setting out their baskets of olives and sour bread. But before the scent of breakfast can reach you, something else does. That unmistakable tang. Acrid. Sharp. You know it's not vinegar. No, it's something more personal. And it's coming from your neighbor's doorway. There he is, Gaius, a leather merchant with more confidence than sense, standing shirtless on his stoop, swirling a cup of yellowish liquid like it's mulled wine. His eyes are half closed in concentration as he tilts his head back and gargles, long, loud, and unapologetic. You gag a little. He grins with frothy teeth. Best thing for the enamel, he tells you proudly, wiping his mouth on his tunic. Kills the rot. You've heard this before. Everyone has. In a city where cavities were as common as coin theft, people had to get creative, and so they did, with crushed bones, with ashes, with pumice. But above all else, there was urine. Not just any urine, mind you. Romans believed in a hierarchy of freshness. Today's pee? Too mild. What you want is stale urine, aged for at least a day or two, preferably until it begins to ferment and develop that ammonia tang that'll strip paint off a chariot. Historians still argue whether this practice came from Etruscan influence or developed independently, but there's no denying it became widespread. Some even claim the ammonia helped whiten teeth and kill bacteria. Others suggest it was just the strongest thing available that didn't cost a fortune or come with side effects worse than cavities. And while it's tempting to think this was a fringe ritual, evidence says otherwise. Urine use was embedded in Roman life. From laundering clothes to whitening fabrics, its ammonia-rich potency made it indispensable. So, it's not a huge leap to imagine someone saying, "Hey, if it works on tunics, maybe it'll work on tartar too." But let's rewind a bit. Before the empire's sugar obsession, before the sweet wines and syrup glazed everything, Roman teeth were doing relatively fine. The early Roman diet was plain: wheat, lentils, olives, a touch of goat cheese. Not much to cause cavities. In fact, skulls from the early Republic often show solid dental structure with minimal decay. That all changed when Rome got rich and greedy. Suddenly, the upper class was guzzling imported honey from Spain, dates from Egypt, figs soaked in wine. Not to mention constant snacking between meals. You'd think toothpicks would help, and sure, they used them, sometimes made of silver or even porcupine quills. But a toothpick doesn't solve a sweet tooth. By the time of Augustus, dental decay was on the rise, and with it, a wave of folk cures, medical scrolls, and whispered advice from street-side apothecaries. You pass one now, his stall cluttered with jars, herbs, and strange powders. He's stirring something into a shallow dish. Crushed oyster shell? Or maybe pulverized goat hoof. Either way, it'll be pressed into someone's mouth by sundown. He nods at you. Got a new blend today. Mint and rat skull. Smells better than it sounds. You smile weakly and move on. Because here's the thing. Romans weren't just practical. They were deeply superstitious. Many believed dental pain wasn't just a health issue. It was punishment from the gods or an imbalance of humors. and treating it required strong measures, pungent measures, measures that occasionally made you more unpleasant to kiss than whatever you were treating. But hey, clean is clean. So people began rinsing with aged urine, swishing, gargling, even spitting it into bowls they'd reuse the next day. Think of it like kombucha, but with fewer probiotics and more gag reflex. Recipes varied. Some mixed urine with vinegar. Others added salt, myrrh, or even rose petals. Because if you're going to clean with pee, you may as well go all in. You think back to Gaius and his bright grin. His teeth aren't perfect, but they're certainly whiter than most. He claims it's the Portuguese lodium he imports, extra pungent, ripened on the voyage. You have your doubts, but his breath does seem less fatal lately. Still, not everyone's convinced. Pliny the Elder, the famous Roman naturalist, cataloged dozens of dental cures, many of them gentler than urine. He preferred myrrh pastes and oil infusions, but he also recorded that urine has remarkable cleansing properties, especially when sourced from young boys. Why? Scholars still argue whether this was about purity, status, or just weird ancient science logic. You shudder. A child runs past you, laughing, holding a clay pot sloshing with something. You don't ask. Because here, in Rome, this is just morning routine. Some folks use soap, some use herbs, and some, like Gaius, keep a labeled jar by the bed for dual-purpose nighttime storage and daytime smile polishing. And you, dear listener, have no toothbrush, but you do have curiosity. And a nose. Lucky you. By now you've realized that in Rome, urine isn't just waste. It's currency. It's cleanser. It's surprisingly versatile. And yes, profitable. You head down the Via Tecta, sandals scuffing against worn stone. It's still early, but a few shopkeepers are already out with brooms, sweeping away last night's mess and flinging slop into the gutter with expert nonchalance. A stream of wastewater trickles past your toes. You step over it gingerly. Just up ahead is a Fullonica, one of Rome's public laundries. And here's where it gets really weird. Rows of stone vats, sunken into the floor, are filled with clothing and, you guessed it, stale urine. The place smells like vinegar, had a long, angry argument with a sewer. But nobody flinches. This is just how laundry is done. You stop and watch for a moment. A man with trousers rolled up to his knees is stomping barefoot in a vat of linens. His feet squish rhythmically through the soaked garments, releasing bubbles and ammonia in equal measure. The cloth froths faintly around his legs. This, dear listener, is chemistry, Roman style. You see, when urine sits out for a few days, it breaks down into ammonia. And ammonia is a powerful cleaning agent, even by today's standards. So those tunics? They're getting a proper deep clean. No artificial detergents, no lemon-scented pods, just good old-fashioned biology. And because demand was so high, the Romans took things a step further. They began collecting urine citywide, from chamber pots, from public urinals, even from roadside jars left specifically for passers-by to donate to the greater hygiene cause. That's right, Rome had a pee collection industry. At its height, Emperor Vespasian got wise to this fragrant revenue stream. Ever the practical leader, he decided that if people were going to make money off waste, the state should get its cut. So he instituted the urine tax, the vectigal urinae. Collectors paid to gather pee from public latrines. Laundry workers paid to receive it. Everyone paid someone, and the empire smiled. Vespasian's critics were quick to scoff. Taxing filth? They said. How undignified. But the emperor, with trademark dryness, held a coin up to his nose and quipped, Pecunia non olet. Money doesn't stink. That phrase, still used today, Historians still debate the exact scope of the tax, whether it applied only to urban centers or also to provincial cities. But there's no doubt the system worked. Rome monetized everything: water, roads, bread, and yes, pee. As you make your way past the Folonica, you notice a young boy arriving with a wooden yoke slung across his shoulders, 2 sloshing jars swinging from either side. He steps into the workyard, nods to the foreman, and tips the contents into a waiting vat. The smell intensifies. No one blinks. Because in Rome, this is civic duty, domestic service, economic opportunity. You wander onward, nose still slightly wrinkled, and pause at a fountain where a baker is rinsing his hands. You can't help but think, did he use that same solution on his teeth this morning? Would his bread smell faintly of hygiene? There's no way to be sure. Some scholars argue that the distinction between cleaning garments and cleaning mouths was blurrier than we might expect. After all, the Romans believed in the elemental properties of substances. If urine could cleanse fabric, could it not also scour a tooth? More importantly, it was cheap, accessible, and if you lived near a public latrine, it was practically overflowing with potential. You pass one now, an arched brick structure with a carved stone bench inside. It's not as private as you'd hope. Users sit side by side, chatting about politics or grain prices while relieving themselves. Beneath the bench, a shallow channel carries away the waste. Sometimes, buckets are stationed nearby to collect it for Foloniki, or, more discreetly, for household use. It's a full-circle economy. But here's a curious twist. Not all urine was created equal. Roman physicians noted differences based on diet, age, even social status. Urine from men who drank wine was considered warmer, more potent. Children's urine, especially from boys, was believed to be gentler. Iberian urine, supposedly the best, rich in ammonia, thanks to regional climate and diet. Traders even shipped barrels of it across the sea, and it fetched a decent price. Imagine the customs paperwork on that cargo. And so, whether for laundry, hair dye, leather tanning, or oral care, urine flowed through Roman daily life like olive oil or wine, ubiquitous, useful, and quietly unpleasant. You duck into a shaded portico and sit for a moment, resting your feet. Around you, life bustles. A woman shouts at her husband for forgetting the figs. A stray cat weaves through the columns. Somewhere nearby, a man sneezes twice and spits into the street. You glance down at the cobblestones, worn by centuries of sandals and sandals, worth of pee. And you think, if everything here is soaked in history, maybe it's also soaked in history. You wake the next morning in a small insula apartment, the sound of clanging pots and arguing neighbors drifting in through the shutters. The air smells of wood smoke, something frying in oil, and something else, faint but ever present. That slightly sour, nose-prickling smell that reminds you where you are. Rome, where cleaning your teeth might mean bracing yourself first. Today's the day. You promised yourself you'd try it. The infamous rinse. You shuffle across the tiled floor to the corner where a small ceramic jar sits. The lid is slightly ajar. You lean in. Yep, it's definitely ripe. See, Romans didn't just use any liquid for their oral hygiene. Aged urine was ideal, not just because of ammonia, but because the fermentation process supposedly gave it bite. Fresh urine was considered too mild, too friendly. The goal was to scour, not soothe. And boy, does this stuff scour. You dip a small sponge, on a stick no less, into the jar and brace yourself. Gaius said to gargle, not just rinse. Let it fizz, he told you. If it doesn't tingle, it's not working. You suspect that advice came with a side of sadism. You take a deep breath, tilt your head back, and swish. Immediately, your eyes water. It's like someone took vinegar, rotten eggs, and a faint whisper of sulfur, mixed them in a bronze goblet, and dared your taste buds to survive. You gag slightly, but keep going. The foam tickles your tongue. Your lips pucker involuntarily. And then, after a good 30 seconds of swirling misery, you spit it back into a chamber pot with a dramatic gasp. Your teeth feel cleaner, or at least traumatized into silence. Now, let's be fair. There's some logic here. Ammonia is known to kill bacteria, and before commercial toothpastes or antiseptic mouthwashes, what else could they use? Herbs only go so far. Salt can be abrasive. And vinegar? Well, vinegar was often saved for wounds and cooking. Urine, on the other hand, was plentiful and, to Roman minds, natural. You hear the street stir to life below, vendors setting up stalls, a neighbor's parrot screeching insults it learned from the bathhouse. You descend the steps, teeth oddly polished, tongue still recovering. Out on the cobbled road, you pass a young woman balancing a basket of herbs. She's chewing on mint sprigs, not just for flavor, but as a natural breath freshener. Across the alley, a teenager sucks on anise seeds, occasionally spitting into the dust. Everyone has their own routine. Some rinse, some chew. A few carry little pots of chalk powder and apply it like toothpaste with the corner of a cloth. But many, perhaps most, use the yellow stuff. You stop by a communal fountain where a barber is sharpening his shears on a flat stone. He eyes your jar and grins. First time? You nod, still a little queasy. He leans closer, his own teeth impressively white. Try Portuguese next time. Aged in amphorae. Smoother finish. You blink. There's a whole luxury market for this? Apparently, yes. Upper-class Romans could afford imported urine, particularly from Iberia, which was thought to be more potent, more refined. It became a quiet status symbol. Some even bragged about it in social circles. Gargled with Iberian vintage today, someone might boast over dinner, as if discussing fine wine. Historians still argue whether this was real chemical superiority or just another case of exotic import snobbery. After all, these are the same people who thought peacock brains were a delicacy. But there's no denying the cultural acceptance. Urine wasn't taboo. It was just part of the toolkit, like olive oil or vinegar. The notion that it was disgusting? That came much later, as attitudes about waste and sanitation evolved. You continue walking, passing a temple where incense curls into the sky. A priest recites a blessing. You can't help but wonder, did he gargle this morning? Are those prayers carried on a breath of ammonia? Probably. You stop at a corner stall, tempted by a fig cake. The vendor grins, his teeth brown at the edges. Not everyone rinses, and not everyone can afford Iberian imports. You take the cake, offer a coin, and make a mental note to rinse again before bed, maybe with fewer bubbles this time, and maybe mix in some mint. A few steps away, two young boys are arguing over a clay pot. One insists it's his turn to carry it to the Phalonica. The other insists he used his own pee. You raise an eyebrow and move on. Rome is strange, but at least it's consistent. Back home, you tuck the jar away. You're still not sure if your teeth are healthier, but your breath doesn't make the cat run anymore, so that's something. And hey, if the emperor can tax it, and society can embrace it, maybe it's not as gross as you thought. Just don't tell your modern dentist. You're walking through the Forum now, the buzzing heart of Rome. Marble pillars rise like ancient teeth themselves, cracked but dignified. Between shouts from market sellers and the scrape of sandals on stone, you hear another sound: laughter. Loud, nasal, genuine. You turn. There's a group of men lounging near a fountain, their tunics pulled casually over sunburned knees, their breath wafting faintly in your direction. You recognize Gaius again. Of course you do. His teeth practically flash like polished ivory. He sees you and waves, beckoning you closer. "Try the good stuff yet?" he asks, producing a tiny flask from his belt. It's engraved, imported. "From Hispania," he adds with a wink. "Cost more than my wife's sandals." You give a polite chuckle, which quickly turns into a cough. Because yes, there it is again. That sharp tang, that nose-twitching acidity. Iberian urine, supposedly the Cadillac of oral cleansers. Now, why Portugal? Or rather, ancient Lusitania. Turns out, urine from certain regions was considered better due to diet, temperature, and storage conditions. Warmer climates sped up the fermentation, and Lusitanian urine was noted for its high ammonia content. Traders began bottling and exporting it, sometimes even sealing amphorae with wax and marking them with the name of the origin town, much like wine or olive oil. You watch Gaius unscrew the flask and take a quick swig, not swallowing, of course, just a rinse. He swishes like a sommelier at a tasting. Smooth, bright finish, not too peppery, he jokes, nudging your elbow. Historians still argue whether this reputation was rooted in real chemical analysis or simply Roman elitism. Much like French perfume or Himalayan salt today, the perceived origin often mattered more than the function. But there's something else going on here. Something cultural. Romans didn't just tolerate urine. They elevated it. By assigning value, creating a market, and distinguishing between common and refined sources, they transformed bodily waste into a luxury commodity. In fact, urine was so prized that specific sellers, urinarii, handled the trade. These weren't just street hawkers. Some operated booths, kept records, and even offered loyalty arrangements for Pholonici and upper-class clients. You stroll down an alley, where one of these booths stands now. The proprietor, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, has rows of jars lined up on shelves. Some are labeled by date, others by origin. He looks up as you approach. "Need something for breath? I've got 5-day Iberian, or a mild blend from Gaul. Less bite, good for beginners." You nod politely and move on, still reeling from the idea that somewhere in Rome, someone is probably haggling over whether their urine is aged enough for next week's dinner party. Nearby, a small chalkboard hangs beside a doorway. Now, offering tooth cleaning by appointment. Domestic blend. Bring your own sponge. You can't help but grin. Of course, not everyone bought into the Iberian obsession. Many Romans used what was available. And there were purists, those who believed the best results came from one's own supply. Know thyself, the Stoics said. Maybe they meant it more literally than you thought. Still, among the wealthy, Iberian urine became a subtle brag. Much like wearing Egyptian linen or serving garum from Spain, it suggested taste, refinement, and the disposable income to prioritize oral hygiene in the most extravagant way. You duck into a shaded atrium where a noblewoman lounges while her handmaid massages her feet. On a table beside her is a small jar with a bronze lid and a tiny stylus for applying paste. You recognize the setup. This is high society mouth care. She doesn't look up as her servant brings over a shallow dish filled with what you hope is perfumed lotium. A moment later, the servant dabs her mouth gently with a linen cloth. Even here, in marble tranquility, the ritual continues. And it's not just hygiene. For some, the act became part of a beauty regimen. Paler teeth were prized. Not quite the bleached glow of today, but certainly cleaner than the yellowed norm. Combining Iberian urine with powdered pumice created a whitening paste that, while abrasive, was effective and expensive. Some texts mention formulas that included iris root or powdered pearl. That is, if you wanted your rinse to come with a touch of class. Imagine a mouthwash that not only burned, but sparkled. Of course, this wasn't without risks. Ammonia is powerful. Overuse could irritate gums, damage enamel, or cause ulcers. But the line between helpful and harmful wasn't well drawn in Roman medicine. If it worked, it was worth the sting. And if it came from Portugal, even better. As you walk the streets again, you notice a cluster of boys playing near a fountain, each with small flasks hanging from their belts. Tooth cleaning as a rite of passage, a new normal. You take another look at your own jar back home and wonder, are you falling behind? Because in Rome, keeping up with hygiene meant more than brushing. It meant sourcing, swishing, and sometimes importing. You're back in your apartment now, sitting cross-legged on a creaky stool, staring down at a little clay bowl on the table. Inside, a lumpy gray paste waits. It's gritty, smells faintly of charcoal, and if you're honest, looks like it came from the bottom of a fireplace, which, in a way, it did. Today, you're making Roman toothpaste, and it's not exactly Colgate. You reach for your mixing stick, already stained from previous experiments. The base is crushed pumice, light volcanic stone, ground into a fine tooth-scraping powder. It's what gives the paste its signature crunch. Add a pinch of salt, a splash of vinegar, a smear of honey if you're fancy, and yes, a spoonful of yesterday's aged urine, still warm from the windowsill. You mix it all together with the dedication of an alchemist, forming a thick, slightly bubbling sludge. This, dear listener, is what the Romans called a dentifricium. You dip in your cleaning rag, woven flax, frayed at the ends, and gently begin rubbing it over your teeth. It tastes like the floor of a tavern. It smells worse, but oddly, it works. Now, Romans didn't have a standard dental toolkit. Instead, recipes varied wildly by region, class, and whoever happened to be writing the medical manual that year. Pliny the Elder, as always, had plenty to say. He suggested everything from burnt deer antler to crushed oyster shells. Celsus, another Roman physician, leaned toward more scientific blends, mixing ashes with vinegar and recommending application by finger or rag. Never stick. And then, of course, there were the outliers. One record suggests the ashes of mouse brains, yes, you heard that right, combined with resin and applied once daily. Supposedly, the rodent essence stimulated circulation. Historians still argue whether this was medical theory or some sort of punishment disguised as a cure. You spit into the bowl and reach for a cup of wine to wash the flavor away. It doesn't help. You decide to take a walk, if only to air out your senses. Outside, a neighbor leans from his window, brushing his teeth with what looks like a mix of ground chalk and goat fat. Another woman further down dabs her gums with myrrh oil and salt, muttering a prayer to Venus as she does. There is no single right way to clean teeth in Rome, only a wide, occasionally horrifying spectrum of choices. You wander into a small apothecary stall, ducking under a curtain of drying lavender. The air is thick with unfamiliar scents, frankincense, thyme, and something suspiciously ammonia-forward. The vendor, an old man with ink-stained fingers and a stoop like a question mark, grins as he sees you. "Looking for brightness?" he asks, holding up a packet wrapped in parchment. "Crushed bone and fig ash, imported from Antioch. Only a few sesterti. You shake your head and point to the small ceramic jars on his shelf. What's in those? Ah, he says, tapping one with a crooked nail. This one is the ash of burned bread. Good for whitening. That one? Crushed snail shells for tartar. And that one, he lowers his voice conspiratorially, has powdered emerald. Only for the rich. Powdered emerald. For teeth. The Romans, it seems, would try anything. You thank him and move on, still tasting pumice and regret on your tongue. As you pass a public notice board, you spot an announcement for a lecture by a Greek physician visiting from Alexandria. The topic: the philosophy of the mouth, cleanliness as civic virtue. You chuckle. Leave it to a Greek to turn morning breath into a moral argument. But they weren't entirely wrong. For Romans, the state of your mouth wasn't just about health. It was about presentation, dignity, even class. A clean smile showed discipline. Rotten teeth were associated with poor habits, foreign foods, and worse, bad breeding. And so, a whole culture sprang up around the pursuit of oral cleanliness. Recipes were passed down like heirlooms. Slaves were trained to prepare pastes. Wealthy families kept specialized jars in their private baths. Even schools taught young boys how to mix and apply their family's preferred blend. One satirical poem from the late Republic describes a man who smelled like he'd kissed a chimney, but had teeth white as a senator's lie. Toothpaste jokes, it seems, are timeless. Back home, you re-examine your bowl. The paste has dried at the edges. You scrape it out into a small container and set it aside for tomorrow. Despite the stench, you admit your mouth feels oddly fresh, or maybe just thoroughly exfoliated. You stretch, the sound of street musicians drifting in through the shutters. Somewhere below, someone is loudly debating the merits of sea salt ash versus chicken bone powder. You smile. It's not minty, but it's yours. And in Rome, that's more than enough. You rise before the sun, footsteps soft on the worn stone floor as you prepare for the day ahead. Not your day, someone else's. Today, you're stepping into the sandals of a servant, a familia slave, to be precise. And your morning chore is one of the least glamorous jobs in all of Rome, brushing your master's teeth. You carry a small tray through the peristyle garden, dew clinging to the marble tiles. The jar of urine wobbles slightly, balanced next to a cloth, a mixing bowl, and a slender bronze tool used for scraping. You try not to spill a drop. The household steward has warned you before, waste not, especially when the waste is useful. In the grand cubiculum, your master reclines in bed, yawning loudly. He's already dictating his schedule for the day, to his secretary, to no one in particular. You hover at his side, waiting for a pause. Finally, with a dismissive flick of his hand, he motions for you to begin. You dip the rag into the cleaning solution. Today's blend is a little more luxurious. Aged Iberian urine mixed with crushed oyster shells and a pinch of dried mint leaves. It smells like ambition. Gently, you dab the cloth along his teeth. He makes a noise, half grunt, half groan, but doesn't stop you. This is routine, expected. In fact, among the upper classes, having a slave to clean your teeth was a mark of status. It meant you had help. It meant you had leisure. And so, day after day, you do this. You apply the paste. You scrub. You rinse the sponge in a bowl, squeeze it out. Repeat. For you, it's work. For him, it's hygiene. Historians still debate how common this practice really was. Some believe it was limited to the wealthiest elite. Others suggest it was more widespread, especially in urban households. But what's clear is that Romans had no qualms about assigning bodily care tasks to their servants. Hair plucking, nail trimming, back scratching, and yes, toothbrushing. Your master grunts again. You step back, rinse your hands in the basin provided, and bow slightly. He waves you away, already reaching for a honey cake. You walk back to the servants' quarters, past a younger slave girl mixing her own dentifrice in a tiny bowl. Hers isn't made of Iberian imports, just plain ash and a few drops of vinegar. Still, she hums as she scrubs. Clean teeth aren't just for the rich, they're for the careful too. In the courtyard, an older servant reminisces about his previous master, a senator who insisted on tooth polishing twice a day and swore by a blend of charcoal and crushed seashells. Had no teeth left by 50, he says, laughing, but they were the cleanest gums in Rome. You laugh too, then stop. Because one of the new boys, barely 12, is being trained in the dental ritual. He's shaking slightly, holding a dampened cloth up to a scowling matron. She grimaces with each stroke. You can see the struggle in his eyes. This is not what he imagined service to be. And yet, he'll learn. Because hygiene in this empire is duty, and duty in this house starts at the mouth. Later, you're sent on an errand to fetch more ingredients from the marketplace. You pass a vendor hawking oyster shell powder and ground deer antler. His banner reads, "Bright teeth, bright future." You smirk. Marketing in Rome hasn't changed much. As you walk, you recall a scene from last week, a dinner party gone awry when a noblewoman recoiled at her companion's breath. "Has he been kissing chamber pots?" she'd whispered, loud enough for half the room to hear. The man had turned crimson, muttering something about running out of his usual rinse. Yes, oral care is serious business. You return home with your bundle of ingredients, carefully labeled and wrapped, and spend the afternoon mixing fresh paste. This time, the master requests a touch of fennel. "For freshness," he says, as if his mouth were a salad. The routine continues. Morning and night. You scrub, you swish, you rinse the bowl and wash the rags, and you wonder briefly what it must feel like to have someone else tend your mouth, day after day, year after year. Then you remember. You're in Rome, the city where one man's mouth is another man's chore. You're on the move again, this time down a narrow back alley lined with crooked signs and the sound of moaning. Not the good kind. The dentist's alley is what people call it, though there's no plaque, no symbol of healing hanging above the doorways. Just faint whimpers, sharp grunts, and occasionally, the unmistakable clink of metal on tooth. Welcome to Roman dental care. Part barber, part surgeon. All discomfort. You duck under a faded linen awning into a dim shop lit by flickering oil lamps. The room smells of myrrh, old sweat, and burnt herbs. A man in his 30s sits rigid in a carved wooden chair, knuckles white on the armrests. His eyes are shut tight, his mouth wide open. Inside, a grizzled practitioner leans in with bronze pliers, muttering under his breath. And then, yank. The scream could wake Cicero from the grave. You flinch, but no one else reacts. The assistant casually drops the bloodied tooth into a jar beside half a dozen others, then starts dabbing the man's mouth with a cloth soaked in wine. Roman dental clinics weren't exactly places of serenity, more like emergency rooms for mouths that had gone beyond what vinegar and urine could fix. And once tooth decay took hold, cracks, abscesses, infections, there was really only one solution: removal. You lean against the wall, trying not to stare at the tray of tools laid out. Bronze picks, curved hooks, heated irons for cauterizing, and of course, the drill. Not the modern kind. No battery-powered precision here. The Roman dental drill was hand-cranked or bow-driven, relying on sheer arm strength and a solid nerve. You spot one now, a slender wooden shaft with a tiny, flint-tipped spiral at its end. The dentist catches your eye and smiles. "Need anything poked or pulled?" he asks. You quickly shake your head. Historians still argue whether these tools were used as frequently as Roman medical texts suggest, or if they were mostly symbolic, a show of preparedness more than regular practice. But skeletal remains tell a different story. Drilled molars, worn enamel, healed jaw fractures. People did get dental procedures. They just had to really need them. You step outside for air, still hearing that man's echo in your ears. But there's another layer to this: prevention. For all their brutal interventions, Romans weren't ignorant of oral hygiene. They knew tooth pain could be minimized. They'd noticed that people who brushed regularly, whether with salt, ash, or pee, had fewer problems. And so, many tried their best to stay ahead of the pain. You pass a modest home where a matron scrubs her daughter's teeth while humming a hymn to Salus, goddess of health. The girl squirms, but she's used to it. It's better than the drill. Elsewhere, a street performer juggles figs while telling jokes about Roman dentists. One punchline involves a man who asks for one cleaning and one prayer, and gets neither. Still, people keep coming to clinics like the one you just left, because for some, it's already too late. You follow the curve of the alley to a quieter side street. There, an elderly man is consulting a traveling healer. No formal shop, just a folding stool and a bag of tools. He asks about his aching jaw, gestures to a swelling. The healer listens, then recommends applying warm vinegar and powdered basil root. "No drill?" the man asks. "Only if it festers," the healer replies, shaking a tiny vial of something dark and sticky. You move on. By the time you reach the forum again, the chaos of earlier has ebbed into midday calm. Merchants lean in shaded corners. Children nap on their mothers' laps. And somewhere, faintly, you hear another scream, distant but familiar. A reminder. You stop at a fountain and sip cool water. Your teeth still sting from this morning's paste, but suddenly you're grateful. Because as terrible as it tasted, it might just keep you from that chair. And really, isn't that the whole point? In Rome, pain is a teacher, but pee is prevention. The sun dips lower now, casting warm amber across the stone streets and statues. The city hums with a softer rhythm, less shouting, more strolling. You find yourself in the Subura, one of Rome's liveliest and occasionally rowdiest neighborhoods. Laundry flaps above your head, and the smell of baked onions and grilled fish competes with the sour tang that still lingers faintly in your nose. You're here to pick up a scroll. Not just any scroll, though. This one's poetry. Roman love poetry, to be exact. You duck into a little shop near the baths where a wiry scribe with ink-stained fingernails is wrapping up a fresh copy of Catullus's latest verses. He hands it over with a grin and a knowing look. "Don't read this one at the family dinner." You nod, thank him, and head to the nearby steps where you can sit and read. The scroll crackles softly as you unroll it, and there it is, full of love, lust, longing, and something else. Breath. Roman poets were many things: bold, romantic, obscene, but they were also brutally honest about hygiene, especially when it came to kissing. Catullus himself wrote a notorious verse condemning a rival for his rank goat breath, claiming that no amount of perfume could disguise a mouth that smelled like a latrine. Another poet compares a lover's kiss to licking a jar of rotting anchovies left in the sun. You laugh softly. Ancient pickup lines these are not. But here's the twist. The disgust wasn't just about personal offense. It was social judgment. Bad breath could ruin reputations, marriages, and political alliances. being known for mouth rot was a public failing, not a private inconvenience, and so the pressure to maintain a clean mouth, however creatively, was intense. Men who wanted to woo wrote about honeyed lips and teeth like pearls, even as they swirled aged urine each morning to earn that illusion. You glance up and notice a young couple walking by. He's leaning in close, whispering something, and she giggles, but subtly pulls away when he gets too near. You wonder if he skipped his rinse today. Historians still debate the sincerity of Roman beauty standards. Were white teeth really considered beautiful, or just a sign of self-control and cleanliness? Some scholars suggest that what mattered most was consistency, that daily ritual, that effort, that performance of hygiene. Poetry offers clues. Many verses mention not just appearance, but smell. A kiss wasn't just judged by touch, but by scent. A mouth that looked clean but breathed sour was worse than a chipped smile that smelled like myrrh. So men and women alike swished their lodium, dabbed on rose oil, or chewed fennel seeds before meetings, dates, and banquets. One scroll from a lesser-known satirist describes a woman mixing a special rinse of boiled herbs and aged urine, her secret weapon against unwanted commentary at the dinner table. The pressure was real and poetic. You reread a verse that compares a lover's mouth to a wine amphora left uncorked and open to the night air. Ouch. Somewhere, that man probably cried into his chamber pot. And yet, even the most acidic poets admitted that with the right regimen, anyone could become desirable. There are verses praising breath so fresh it masks the sour of old olives, or teeth so clean they outshine the moon on a cloudy night. Whether literal or hyperbolic, the message is clear. If you want love, you better rinse. You roll up the scroll and tuck it under your arm. The breeze carries the scent of roasted pine nuts and sweet bread now, overtaking the bathhouse funk. You smile, suddenly aware of your own mouth again. The irony, of course, is that all this breath-based drama coexisted with some truly funky lifestyles. People rarely bathed every day. Street gutters doubled as sewers. And yet, if your breath was off, that was the red line, the deal breaker. Rome may have built aqueducts and conquered continents, but a bad kiss, that could topple your chances faster than a missed Senate vote. You walk on, passing a graffiti-covered wall. One message stands out, scrawled in charcoal. Lucius stinks not from sweat, but from silence. Say something or rinse. You chuckle. Even anonymous poets had standards. As the city dims into evening, you realize that behind all the marble, empire, and poetry, Rome was a place where people cared deeply, almost obsessively, about how they smelled to others. And nothing, absolutely nothing, was judged more sharply than what came out of your mouth. The evening buzz softens into a kind of sleepy shuffle as lamps are lit and shutters are closed across the city. You take a slow walk past the Palatine Hill, the great villas glowing faintly behind their high walls. It's quiet now, just a few dogs barking in the distance and the occasional clatter of amphorae being stacked for tomorrow's deliveries. You stop at a wine stall tucked between two columns. The merchant recognizes you and waves. "Sweet Falernian tonight," he says proudly, "thick with honey. One cup and you'll forget your own name." You nod, tempted, but something clicks in the back of your mind. Sweet wine, sticky figs, honey cakes, all delicious, all devastating for teeth. And here's the hidden truth about status in Rome. The richer you were, the worse your teeth probably were. It's strange, isn't it? The upper class, those draped in purple, those who swirled Iberian lotium in ivory flasks, were also the ones most likely to rot their teeth away with decadence. Because wealth brought sugar, and sugar brought trouble. You glance down at the stall's offerings: candied dates from Judea, pomegranate syrup, honey-roasted almonds. Every one of them is a tiny toothache waiting to happen. Historians have long noted this pattern. Early Roman skulls, from poorer citizens and rural areas, often show excellent dental health, minimal decay, strong enamel, but upper-class burials, often riddled with cavities, abscesses, and worn enamel from overly abrasive powders. Somewhere between conquest and comfort, Rome sweetened its diet and soured its smiles. You sip a small cup anyway, just one. The wine coats your tongue like velvet, thick and floral. A rare treat. You imagine a senator doing the same, only with triple the honey and none of the restraint. And tomorrow morning, that senator will reach for his Iberian rinse and hope it's enough to undo the damage. You wander onward, past the domus of a merchant known for his marble teeth. Literally. Rumor says he paid to have decayed ones pulled and replaced with carved ivory inlays. It sounds like fiction, but scholars believe such cosmetic enhancements did exist in rare cases. Crude prosthetics, early dentures, even decorative inlays using gold wire or carved bone. The man himself, if the stories are true, had a dazzling smile that gleamed like a temple facade, but apparently he couldn't chew anything tougher than mashed figs. Ah, the price of perfection. You turn down a side street where a modest taberna is closing shop. The owner sweeps crumbs from the doorway, mumbling about taxes and spoiled olives. You nod politely, then pause. Behind him, on a small shelf, sits a ceramic bowl filled with a pale gray paste, his own dentifrice, probably made from what he could scrounge: wood ash, crushed bones, maybe a bit of vinegar. No Iberian imports here. And yet, he smiles freely. His breath is tolerable. His teeth, though a little crooked, show no sign of rot. It's a quiet lesson. Sometimes moderation beats medicine, or at least it beats gargling flaming wine every night and hoping a jar of ammonia can rescue you the next morning. You head toward the riverbank, watching as a group of young men joke and splash water at each other, still buzzing from a wine-fueled dinner. One of them trips and nearly falls into the Tiber. Laughter erupts. But you catch a snide comment as they walk off, one boy teasing another for smelling like a candied goat. Tooth jokes. Again. Always. You recall a particularly brutal satirical scroll you saw once, poking fun at the wealthy with verses like, "His purse is heavy, his breath is sweet, too sweet, like death in syrup." Poetic, and a little horrifying. You stop to rest on a low stone wall overlooking the water. The moon reflects off its gentle current. You run your tongue across your teeth, still smooth from this morning's routine, and realize something. You're starting to understand the Roman obsession. It wasn't just about hygiene, or love, or even health. It was about image, to look clean, to smell right, to appear orderly, even when everything else was chaos. Bad teeth were visible proof of indulgence, of weakness, of failure to maintain control over your body. And in Rome, image was everything, so they brushed with ash, rinsed with pee, paid top coin for fancy lotium and dentifrice laced with precious powders, because in the end, every empire has its vanity, and for Rome, it just happened to come with breath that could strip paint. You rise, stretching, and start walking home under the moonlit sky. Somewhere behind you, a couple is arguing softly over the price of pine resin. Further up the hill, a nobleman coughs violently between swigs of syrupy wine. And you? You make a quiet vow to go easy on the honey tomorrow. The morning is bright and oddly quiet. Rome in one of its rare, gentle moods. You make your way through a quieter district now, closer to the Aventine Hill, where homes sit a little farther apart, and the air smells less like vinegar and sweat, and more like herbs and damp stone. The kind of place where wealth lives just a little more softly. But even here, the empire's strangest obsession follows you. Because as you pass a shaded atrium garden, you catch sight of a woman dabbing something onto her cheeks with a soft linen cloth. Her mirror is polished bronze. Her skin glistens faintly. You lean closer, just for a second, and then you catch the scent. Urine. Again. Not the kind from a tooth-cleaning jar this time. This is part of her beauty routine. Yes, you heard that right. Romans didn't stop at rinsing their mouths with urine. They also smeared it on their faces. You're not hallucinating. In fact, this practice was surprisingly common. Romans believed that aged urine could whiten the skin, reduce blemishes, and even soften wrinkles. It was used in creams, masks, even hair products. Want blonde hair? Try a pee rinse. Want smoother arms? Dab on a bit of fermented lotium. Want to exfoliate your legs? Mix it with pumice and go to town. You sit on a low step near the woman's house, trying to process it all. She hums a little tune as she works. Her arms are bare, her smile relaxed. To her, this is normal. Just another step in the pursuit of pulchritudo, beauty. Historians still argue whether this was purely cosmetic or had medicinal roots. Some Roman physicians recommended urine-based skin care for treating eczema or minor infections. Others claimed it balanced the body's humors, drawing out toxins. And for the poor? It was simply the most affordable cleanser around. You walk on, now more aware than ever of the many ways this one odd liquid flowed through Roman life. You pass a row of laundry hung on twine between two buildings. The garments are soaking wet. Beneath them, a bucket catches the runoff. Yellow, smelling faintly of ammonia. Welcome to Roman fabric care. Urine wasn't just used to clean the mouth and face. It was a full-body commitment. Laundry workers stomped it into clothes, sure, but others used it to bleach garments, dye fabric, and even soften leather. The scent? Overwhelming. The effectiveness? Undeniable. You spot a tanner nearby, scraping a hide against a flat rock. The leather darkens with each stroke, soaked first in lime, then in, you guessed it, urine. He doesn't even flinch. In fact, he dips his fingers into a jar to soften a particularly stubborn spot. It's almost poetic, in a strange way. The same substance that scoured teeth was also trusted to prepare the very sandals you're walking in. You turn a corner into a small market square where a perfumer has set up shop. Now this is unexpected. Sweet scents in tiny glass vials, all carefully arranged on silk. Lavender, rose, crushed amber. You lift one to your nose. Relief. Finally. But the vendor chuckles. Don't get used to it, he says. Half my customers use perfume to mask their lotium routines. Face, teeth, even hair. You nod. It makes sense. The pungency of cleanliness in Rome was challenging. One woman picks up a vial and dabs it behind her ears. She glances sideways. Better than vinegar, she mutters. You realize then, this whole city is a balancing act. Scent and function, style and stomach. They push their bodies through rituals that make modern eyes water, literally, but it works. In a world without soap, without disinfectant, without Listerine, they made do. They found tools, and sometimes those tools came from themselves. You pass another group of women seated on the steps of a bathhouse. One is brushing her hair with a mixture of olive oil and, yes, urine. Her friend teases her for it, but she shrugs. It works, she says, and it's free. A man walks by just as she says it. He nods solemnly. My brother cured his foot rot with lotium, Soaked it 3 days, didn't walk straight the whole time, but now he dances again. Cured with pee. Of course, you reach the edge of the square where a young boy sells sponge sticks, used for everything from brushing teeth to cleaning after the toilet. He waves one proudly. Good for mouths, better for skin. You chuckle. You've heard worse slogans. As the sun climbs higher and the city hums with activity, you realize that urine wasn't a dirty secret. It was a trusted ally, a cleanser, a beautifier, a healer. And while your modern instincts may scream, "No thanks," the Romans, pragmatic, unflinching, and frankly fearless, embraced it with an open mind and a cloth in hand. They didn't just rinse their mouths with it, they made it part of their identity. Afternoon drapes across Rome like a warm, faded toga. You follow the curve of the Aventine down toward the city's more utilitarian underbelly, the place where necessities are handled quietly, and sometimes with a little shame. You're headed to the latrines, not the little chamber pots tucked away in private homes. No, these are Rome's public toilets, social spaces, functional marvels, and, to the modern nose, fairly unforgettable. You arrive at one near the Tiber, its stone facade adorned with faded inscriptions and the occasional carved fig leaf, because even when squatting in rows, the Romans believed in decorum. Inside, it's cool, dark, and echoing. A long marble bench stretches from wall to wall, with evenly spaced holes carved into its top. Below, a shallow channel carries away waste via a continuous stream of running water. Ingenious, and a little unsettling. You sit, not to, use the facility, but to observe. 2 elderly men sit chatting casually, their tunics hitched just high enough for business. One is gossiping about his neighbor's goat escaping again. The other is holding a sponge on a stick, a tersorium. He dips it in the shared basin of water, gives it a half-hearted swish, and sets it beside him. You try not to think about the fact that these sponges are shared. Very shared. But here's the twist. Urine plays a role here too. In some latrines, particularly the busier ones, large jars were stationed just outside or inside the entrance, labeled plainly. Passers-by were encouraged to contribute their lodium to the public good. After all, it could be collected, aged, and sold. And yes, many did it proudly, even eagerly. You see a young man now, ducking around the side with a small jar tucked beneath his cloak. He empties it discreetly into a collection vessel, looks around, and leaves with a lightened step. You wonder if he'll be paid in coin, or just in the knowledge that his urine might one day whiten someone's toga or someone's teeth. Historians still argue whether this urine collection was considered honorable or merely tolerated. Some say it was civic-minded. Others argue it had a social sting, a task for the poor, the desperate, or the unusually entrepreneurial. But the infrastructure was real. And the jars? Everywhere. You walk back outside, the late sun casting long shadows down the alley. Just beside the latrine stands a small tax station. Nothing fancy, just a table, a clerk, and a few wax tablets. This is where collectors come to register their haul. The vectigal urine, or urine tax, is due. It was Vespasian, you'll recall, who introduced this now infamous tax. And while many laughed at the idea, the emperor doubled down. The money was real. The supply was endless. And when critics sneered, he held up a coin and asked, "Does it smell to you?" Pecunia non olet. Money doesn't stink. You pause to consider that phrase. Even now it's quoted by economists and cynics alike. And yet, standing here, nose wrinkled from the sharp tang of aged lodium seeping from open jars, You're not entirely convinced. Still, the efficiency of it all is undeniable. Rome had found a way to monetize everything. Bath water, bread rations, even the waste from the body. And in a strange way, this system worked. Waste was recycled. Streets stayed marginally cleaner. The Phalonike got their supplies. The merchants kept smiling. And the wealthy? They got their imported rinse. Perhaps with a little stamp of origin guaranteeing it came from a high-traffic urinal near the Senate. You shake your head, but there's a begrudging admiration in it. The Romans saw opportunity in what others flushed away. They understood the full value of bodily processes, practical, economic, even medicinal. You pass a small girl carrying a chamber pot balanced expertly on her head. She winks at you and disappears into a nearby courtyard, probably delivering it to a laundry or apothecary. She's maybe 8 years old, already part of the supply chain. Further up the street, you spot a new sign being posted on a latrine wall, a poem of sorts, likely graffiti scratched into plaster. From lips to loins and back again, Rome's golden stream flows like the rain. You blink. That's surprisingly poetic and deeply unsettling. As evening approaches, the public toilets empty. Men fasten their belts. Women step out of the shade, adjusting their shawls. The city exhales. And yet, behind every breath, behind every clean tunic and polished tooth, there's that quiet truth. Rome runs on pee. You walk home slowly, passing a full collection jar waiting by a door, half hidden in shadow. Someone's contribution to cleanliness, someone else's profit. It's a system, circular, efficient, strangely elegant, and of course, a little bit gross. The next day brings with it a haze of humidity and the kind of slow, wilting energy that even Rome's marble facades can't shake off. You duck under an awning near the Forum and find a crowd gathered, murmuring, not at a speaker or a senator, but at a makeshift booth covered in scrolls, diagrams, and a table full of bubbling jars. A physician is giving a demonstration. A real one. No street magic quackery here. This man wears the pale robes of the educated, and he speaks with that confident, vaguely bored cadence that says he's either brilliant or entirely full of it. You step closer, catching snippets. And so, when mixed properly, vinegar will cleanse the teeth without the lingering scent of lodium. Ah, there it is. The debate, vinegar versus urine. The great oral hygiene showdown of late Roman domestic life. The physician, perhaps from the school of Galen, dips a reed brush into a bowl of grayish paste and begins to scrub a piece of animal bone in a mock demonstration. "Observe," he says, holding up the bone. "Stain gone. No odor. No degradation of enamel." A skeptical voice from the back speaks up. "And what of ammonia? What of whitening?" The crowd shifts. Tension rises. This is what passes for drama in a world without Netflix. Ammonia whitens, yes, the doctor concedes. But too much corrodes the gums. I've seen men with breath like roses and mouths like burned wheat fields. That earns a few chuckles. You glance to your left and see an older woman frowning deeply. She clutches a worn scroll to her chest, clearly her own recipe, possibly passed down through generations. She mutters something about young fools with their vinegar and their weak gums. You smile. There's a generational divide here. Old Rome prefers the tried and true, urine aged under the summer sun, mixed with fine salt and a whisper of mint. The new school, they want refinement, subtlety, something a little less pungent to start the day. You've stumbled into a civic health debate, and it's more intense than you expected. Historians still argue whether vinegar-based treatments were a late development in Roman oral hygiene, or if they coexisted with urine the whole time. Some sources claim vinegar was reserved for the wealthy. Others suggest it was simply preferred in regions where wine production made it cheap and plentiful. Either way, the arguments haven't cooled in 2 millennia. You approach the booth and inspect one of the recipe scrolls. It's labeled, "For teeth like polished ivory, without the reek of the urinal." Catchy. Ingredients include powdered eggshell, white wine vinegar, and something labeled as sun-dried mouse bones. You choose not to ask. Next to it sits another scroll, older, crumbling at the corners. This one is more traditional. A true Roman smile. Lodium, pumice, and faith. A smile creeps across your face. Faith, indeed. You wander from the crowd and into a shaded colonnade, where an apothecary is selling bundles of mint and fennel. He sees your bemused expression and grins. Debate day again? You nod. Vinegar versus the old ways. He snorts. They'll never agree. I sell both. Smart man. He gestures to 2 neat rows of jars. The first, dark green glass, are labeled vinum acerbum, bitter wine. The second, simple clay pots sealed with wax, are marked with a small golden symbol, a tiny, hand-carved bladder. Luxury lotium. You're tempted to ask where he sources it, but decide not to. Some things are better left behind the curtain. As you leave, a child runs past carrying a sponge stick and a bag of dried herbs. She skids to a stop, then looks up at you. "My brother says vinegar's for cowards," she announces proudly. "But Mama says it's for kissing." You laugh out loud, the wisdom of Rome's youth. You head home, thoughts buzzing louder than the cicadas in the pines. It's remarkable, really, how a civilization so vast, so obsessed with conquest and glory, still finds time to argue over the best way to clean a molar. But maybe that's the point. Rome isn't just triumphal arches and blood-stained sand. It's domestic, intimate, full of questions about breath and love, and how to be just a little more kissable without smelling like you gargled a stable. As you pass a bathhouse, the steam rising through the vents, you overhear a pair of women arguing. If he uses vinegar, one says, he's hiding something. Or maybe, the other replies, he's just tired of tasting yesterday's laundry. The door swings shut behind them. You walk on, the debate unresolved. But that's Rome for you. No empire can agree on everything. Twilight falls gently across Rome, drawing long shadows between the columns and cobblestones. You're walking near the Circus Maximus now, where the chariots have long since stopped racing and the stands are empty, but the scent of roasting nuts and street vendors lingers on the breeze. It's quieter than usual, reflective. You head toward a small library, a private one, kept by an aging patrician who collects scrolls the way others collect gossip. He welcomes you with a nod and motions toward the back shelves. You're not here for poetry or philosophy tonight. You're here for records, something specific. The scroll he hands you is brittle, its edge darkened from age. But the script is clear, a treatise from a Christian writer, denouncing unclean customs of the old world. You sit by the window, fireflies blinking outside, and begin to read. Urine is mentioned in the very first line. As the empire shifts from pagan splendor to Christian morality, certain habits are called into question, none more pungently than those involving human waste. The writer, possibly Lactantius or a lesser-known bishop, argues that true cleanliness comes from the soul, not from bathing in bodily byproducts, that the body, a temple of God, should not be desecrated with the tools of its own decay. You read on, fascinated. This isn't science, it's symbolism, and it signals a change. The writer claims that lodium, once praised for its cleansing powers, now represents vanity, that to rinse one's mouth with it is to misunderstand divine purity. Let no man make holy what comes from filth, one passage declares, for such rituals belong to Saturn's shame, not Christ's light. Strong words for mouthwash. You close the scroll slowly, thoughts drifting. It's true. By the 4th and 5th centuries CE, as Christianity's influence spreads, Roman hygiene begins to change. The grand bathhouses fall into disrepair. Public latrines, once busy and communal, are considered indecent, and the once prized jars of Iberian rinse quietly vanish from apothecaries' shelves. Historians still debate how quickly this shift occurred. Some say it was gradual, that older citizens clung to their Lodium rituals while younger converts embraced new values. Others believe it was more immediate, especially as church leaders began preaching more openly against pagan bodily customs. You walk back outside into the cooling air. Rome is still Rome. Its bones remain, its walls still whispering. But the spirit feels different. The obsession with scent, cleanliness, and appearance has not disappeared, but it's changed direction. You pass a man lighting a candle at a small street altar. He crosses himself, then dabs his mouth with rose water from a copper bowl. A new ritual, more perfumed, less pungent. Further down, a vendor is emptying what appears to be a collection jar into the gutter. He grimaces. No one's buying these anymore, he mutters. I might start bottling vinegar instead. You pause beside him, peering down into the swirling runoff. The smell is faint now, diluted. Soon, it'll be forgotten, at least by most, but not everyone lets go so easily. You stop at a doorway where an older woman is brushing her teeth with a stick wrapped in cloth. You can smell the ammonia before she even sees you. She notices your glance and shrugs. Old habits, she says. Cleaner than wine, cheaper than prayers. There's a stubbornness in her voice, a pride. You smile and nod, then keep walking. Because the empire might be changing, but people take longer. The scrolls may call it shameful. The priests may call it impure. But in kitchens, back alleys, and faded apartments, a few old jars remain. Quiet, useful, familiar. And the funny thing? As the church rises and Rome's political structure begins to fray, the New World becomes less focused on cleanliness. Bathing becomes rare. Dental care nearly vanishes in some regions. Lodium is gone, but so are pumice pastes, herbal rinses, and the daily discipline of hygiene. You realize with a strange sort of irony that the people who gargled with pee were probably cleaner, at least in some ways, than many who came after them. You reach your door as the stars emerge overhead. Crickets sing. Somewhere a donkey brays. You pause on the threshold, one hand resting on the cool stone frame. The empire is fading, but for now, you're still in it. And the next time someone scoffs at ancient practices, you'll remember. They might not have had mint, but they had dedication. They had science of a sort, and they had a kind of clarity, however acidic it smelled. Morning again. But something feels different. Rome's still Rome, of course. The air still hums with the low rhythms of footsteps and cartwheels. Vendors already barking out deals before the sun's properly up. But your walk through the streets feels slower today. The city's edges seem softer. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's that this journey, this deep, foamy dive into Roman oral hygiene, is finally winding to a close. You pass a group of schoolboys reciting poetry outside a grammar school. One is lisping through a missing tooth, the other's laughing not unkindly. You smile, a missing molar, still a rite of passage. But as you turn down a narrow street between two tenement blocks, you see something that stops you. An old woman, dressed in a threadbare shawl, is scrubbing the teeth of her granddaughter with a tiny sponge on a stick. The girl is squirming, her face contorted into a half-laugh, half-gag. The smell wafts toward you before the breeze catches it, still unmistakable, still sharp. Lodium. You thought it was gone, faded with the bathhouses, swallowed by sermons and perfumed water. But here it is, quiet, ordinary, alive. You pause, not wanting to interrupt, and listen. Hold still, the woman says. It'll keep the rot away. Your uncle used to rinse every day, and he didn't lose a tooth until 50. The girl groans. But it stinks. So does the world, her grandmother replies, matter of fact. At least this helps. There it is again. Practicality. Not nostalgia, not stubbornness. Just the raw Roman instinct to do what works, no matter how strange, no matter what the world now says is proper. Because even as the empire ages, reforms, and splinters, people cling to their own small empires, their homes, their habits. Historians still argue whether this final generation of Lodium users really believed in its power, or whether it was just routine, inertia dressed up as tradition. But does it matter? A routine can be a form of resistance, of self-respect. You move on. Down at the marketplace, a perfumer is crushing dried lavender petals. A few stalls away, a barber is mixing a minty vinegar rinse for a nervous client. Next to him, a man is spitting discreetly into a clay pot behind a curtain, and a boy is hawking sponges near the fountain, shouting that his will leave your breath like roses, or at least better than fish. The empire might no longer glorify its golden rinse. The church might call it crude, but it hasn't entirely vanished. Like graffiti on a city wall, it's faded, but not forgotten. As the day warms, you pass one last sight. An old stone step at the corner of the Temple of Castor and Pollux. Worn smooth, familiar. You sit. Here's the thing. Every civilization has its oddities, its homegrown fixes. Rome just had the honesty to own them. It didn't hide its obsessions. It taxed them, bottled them, gave them names. You remember the first time you swished the stuff, how it burned, how it lingered. And now, your teeth feel cleaner than they ever did back home. Or maybe that's just pride. Either way, you're part of this history now. A little. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. You rise, stretch, and breathe deep. Your breath, surprisingly fresh, and somehow imperial. So now, dear listener, with the Roman sun finally dipping behind the rooftops and the hum of city life turning into the hush of distant footsteps, let's slow things down. You've wandered through alleys of ash and marble. You've sniffed more amphorae than anyone should. You've seen ancient science at work. Painful, pungent, and oddly effective. And through it all, you've walked not just the streets of Rome, but the private routines of its people. Proud, clever, and never afraid to get a little unconventional. Let the clatter of carts fade from your ears. Let the scent of crushed mint, faded parchment, and sun-warmed stone drift into memory. You're no longer standing beside a Phalanca or ducking under a perfumer's awning. You're back, wherever you are now, safe and clean and dry. Your mouth, perhaps, a little more grateful for modern toothpaste. But isn't it something to know that people 2,000 years ago were wrestling with the same morning breath, the same awkward kisses, the same question, how do I present myself to the world? Their answers were different, but their concerns, the same. So close your eyes, let your breath slow, and rest in the knowledge that even in an empire of emperors and marble gods, someone once stood in front of a mirror, jar in hand, and muttered, "Well, here goes." Sweet dreams.